You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Hi, I'm Dr. Pamela Kreiser, and welcome back to NCR 525, which is our course about mediation. Today we're going to have a very special program. Today's program is focused on learning about MSL, which is Mediation as a Second Language. And today we're going to be able to talk to the founder of that program and learn about their success in this cutting-edge way of teaching mediation. But before we do that interview, I want you to take a look at the video about the program so you can understand a little bit more about what it is. Let's take a look.
Welcome to Mediation as a Second Language, also known as ESP for conflict resolution. This video shows some of the activities we use the first few weeks of a course. We start with activities to establish the interactive, upbeat tone of the course, introduce key concepts, terms, and language points, and let students practice the variety of learning styles we'll be using. We emphasize understanding in every sense of the word.
I don't know where we should buy the house, and you would like to buy a house, but you don't know what to do because...
These activities are building the foundation for negotiation and mediation, but they're so similar to standard English language lessons that instructors can present them with little or no training in conflict resolution. One way to introduce mediation is with a script, to let students experience an entire mediation from start to finish. Scripts are training wheels to provide a strong foundation and to connect the mediation with the language, concepts, and skills we've been practicing in class. As we go through the script, the training wheels will be removed gradually, allowing or requiring the students to start taking control of the process. Another time she stood in the doorway of my room. This scripted mediation is based on the short story Mother by Grace Paley. And now you will be introduced to mediation along with the students.
Good afternoon. I would like to welcome you to the mediation. I'm Olga and this is Takuya. And please introduce yourself.
Nice to meet you. I'm Jay.
Hi Jane. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And you?
Nice to meet you. I'm Mrs. B.
Mrs. B. Great to have you here.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Please now let's have a seat.
Thank you.
The mediators ask each party to tell their story, and then the mediators use the same active listening skills they've been practicing, mainly paraphrasing and checking to confirm their understanding. The mediators are helping the parties understand not only the facts, but also their emotions, needs, and values without any judgment. Now the parties are ready to talk with each other in new, more positive ways. The mediators are still there to guide them. The mediators guide and encourage a creative brainstorming session, and then provide reality checking to help the parties create a sustainable agreement.
Does that work for you?
And as in any peer review for writing, to check on specificity, clarity, editing, etc. The mediators congratulate the parties on a job well done and all say goodbye.
Thank you so much for coming and we're happy that you reached results.
Thanks to the students' creativity and diligence, they have reached agreements. The training wheels were removed during brainstorming, so these really are their own written agreements. Next class, the students will do their first real mediation role play without training wheels or scripts.
So today I have the founder of the MSL program with me on the show. Welcome to our show, Barry Roberts.
Thank you very much, Pamela. So happy to be here.
We are so excited to have you, and it's interesting because I was thinking about how I met you through a judge, actually, and we had talked about so many other topics, and then a new discovery was that you were a founder of this program.
So interesting, yes.
So that's the whole show that we want to do, and so we've seen the video. it gives us just a tiny view of what the program is. I guess in your words, how would you describe MSL? Like what would you say it is?
Well, MSL, or Mediation as a Second Language, is based on ESL, English as a Second Language, which, as your viewers probably know, is teaching English to people who speak a different first language and need English for daily life, work, school, etc. So the idea of MSL is to do ESL, teach ESL through mediation. So we use mediation to teach English, and we use English to teach mediation.
Okay, so it goes both ways.
Well, yes, because some students really don't care about mediation at all. They just want a new, interesting, exciting, authentic way to learn English rather than sitting and studying grammar. So we're putting them into role plays and active listening exercises, and they're using English for these exercises. And we build in vocabulary, grammar, sentence structure, all of that. But the other way is we have foreign lawyers, foreign business people who actually need to learn mediation, but English is their second language. But they need to do mediation and negotiation in English. So we're teaching mediation in a way they can really drill down to the language, the culture, the sociolinguistics of it. So it's a special mediation course for people who speak it's a special mediation course in English for people who speak a first language other than English.
Okay, so one thing that I'm thinking about as you're describing this is traditional ESL training more like one-shot deals, like we teach vocabulary today and then we teach this one exercise like that? Because this seems like a very collective experience, which would differentiate it, I would think.
Yes, this uses all the skills. It uses all English skills to that. There are some ESL courses that do exactly what you say. It's a vocabulary course. Or it's a grammar course.
Right.
And then there's some mixed skills courses. And there's some that are all about communication. So there's a variety of ways to teach ESL. But of course, my course draws on all of the skills in a very authentic way.
Right, so that seems more integrated
Yes.
in like a coherency kind of way. Like it all comes together, which is sort of how communication is, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Not that I have any opinions about that, having a PhD in interpersonal communication. But let's talk about your background. So what's your background that suits you to this work?
Well, I started off as a community mediator with community boards in San Francisco on panels of 3, which is a mediation in itself among the panelists. A lot goes on under the table. Your students may or may not know about that. And then years later, I went to the Strauss Institute at Pepperdine University School of Law and got an LLM in dispute resolution.
Which is the Master of Law.
Correct.
And then it is also a JD if you want it to be? I can't remember.
Well, first you have to have a JD. So this is for people who already have JDs, they're already lawyers, and now they're going back for more.
Okay. Seems like a lot of schooling.
It's a lot of schooling.
Wow. Okay. And then you probably have foreign language training, like ESL training, I imagine. Yes.
Well, yes, of course, I have my training in teaching English as a second language. It's called TESOL. I've got my MA in that at CSU Sacramento.
Okay. So you've been in a lot of classrooms.
I have a lot of degrees.
That's good.
I think I covered them all.
I like that.
Sometimes too many.
Okay, so tell me, where have you taught MSL, and where would anyone find it today?
Well, I teach MSL at UC Berkeley in the Summer Language Institute. And I'm here in LA now, so fortunately I have 3 or 4 Berkeley instructors who have been trained to teach MSL, and now they're teaching it, which is a beautiful thing because they're teaching it in their own way. MSL is adaptable to any ESL instructor from kindergarten through business school. We can find a way to teach the mediation and negotiation skills in terms of an ESL, in the context of an ESL course for any ESL instructor. So unfortunately, right now it's still at Berkeley, but we do go to international teaching conferences from time to time and give workshops for teachers there.
Okay, so then a student who is learning English as a second language goes to the Summer Institute at Berkeley, and then is this a program that's a week-long,
It's
2
a
weeks
summer
long?
program. They can take a 3-week program or a 6-week program at UC Berkeley. Usually it's international students coming just for the summer. And we have a whole array of courses there for them. These are usually general English students, but occasionally we have law students who, and it's perfect for the law students. By the way, speaking of law students, I also teach a version of MSL at the Chapman University School of Law. Of course, that course is more focused on negotiation for foreign lawyers.
Okay. So you're doing everything.
I try. There's a lot more to do.
Okay, yeah, well, I imagine that. All right, and then, so currently Berkeley is where it is. Tell me what are some of the activities that go on in that program? Like what, if I were to walk in one day, like what would I see the students doing with those teachers?
Well, I'm so glad you showed the video because that is what it looks like. And probably your courses look very similar as well, right? We're doing exercise. It's interactive.
Yeah.
So it's active listening, it's role plays, it's debriefing, it's partner work, group work. I give a lecture and it's interactive. So it really tracks a mediation course with language built in.
So that seems like it's complicated for the teacher to me. Because you have the ESL part, but you also have the confirming for understanding part, and then maybe the culture interfacing that doesn't mean the same thing. You know, it doesn't translate perfectly. Like I would imagine
Exactly.
there's some difficulties there.
There are some challenges, and it takes a lot longer. You really have to plan carefully. So, for example, if you're doing a lesson on conflict styles, right? So the conflict styles: avoid, compete,
Right.
collaborate, all those styles. We might not pay much attention to those terms, but in an ESL course, you really have to stop and think. When you're using the term compromise, what does that really mean to people from different cultures and languages? Is it weak? Is it strong? Is it neutral? You
Yeah.
have to really talk about it. And what are the language? What are the terms in their own languages? Not only the terms, but the cultural overlay, the cultural
Yeah.
feelings about it. So we really stop and think about it. And you know, after doing this with students from so many different cultures, I started thinking, why don't we do this for English speakers as well?
Right.
It really pays off.
So
to think
is
about.
that where you started thinking about the Chapman application? Where you,
No, I started thinking about this after years of teaching foreign law students and international students. I started thinking, why is this only for them? If I were teaching a mediation course for native speakers of English, why wouldn't I stop and think about the words we're using and what we really mean?
okay.
And not assuming we all mean the same thing by
Right.
collaborate.
Right.
For example.
Yeah.
Right.
And I teach uniquely, about 95% of my undergrads that I train in mediation are comm studies majors.
Oh,
So they have
interesting.
very high opinions about like what's good. Collaborating is a very good thing, they think in their minds, and avoiding is very bad. I'm not saying that they don't have those styles tendencies, of course that varies, but they have like some allegiances to styles, and I always tell them that's not necessarily useful
No, I
to
completely
do that.
agree.
You know, so I'll say like when you're high in collaboration, sometimes you can't let little things go. And I've seen mediators in court where they attack every single detail, and I think to myself, you're missing the main issues because you can't decide what to let go and what to keep. And so that's kind of shows up differently in my classroom anyway.
Well, I think beginners, and I include myself in this, we get very attached to a philosophy or a theory, and there's one way to do it. And I think as we get more experience, we see that there are strengths and weaknesses to all of those skills. Sometimes avoid
Yeah.
is the most skillful thing,
Yeah.
depending on the situation. So I actually have
Yeah.
my students do a chart, strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons for
Right.
each style. When would you deploy this? When would you deploy
Yes.
that? And
Yeah.
actually, no matter what we say we do, let's see what we really do. How many times?
I'm
do
with
we
you
do-
on that one. It's like there's the job description, and
Right.
then there's what we actually do that the boss
Right.
doesn't know.
It takes some years to be able to admit to that.
Yeah, but that's okay. All in good time, right?
Right.
So I guess we should back up a little bit and talk about how did this occur to you in the onset? Like when did you think of this program as the founder? Like what was that moment or moments?
Well, it's funny you say it because it actually was a moment, an actual light bulb moment. What happened was I had been a lawyer for many years. I left that part out. But I was a public interest legal aid lawyer. And after many years of that, I decided I needed a complete break. And
Okay.
that is when I studied teaching English as a second language. So after getting my MA and teaching a little bit and spending some time teaching grammar, I thought, you know what? I'm missing the law. Grammar is great, but I'm used to preventing homelessness and fighting the good fight. So I thought a way back into law might be mediation. So
Okay.
that's when I went to the San Francisco Community Boards and took a training. So I was very new teaching ESL, and I was completely new to mediation. But during an early active listening exercise, which I'm sure your students and viewers know about. Partner A tells a story, partner B paraphrases and checks to see if he or she got it right, and we move on from there. A light bulb actually went off. This is exactly what we do in ESL. We are promoting understanding. Understanding has so many different meanings. Sometimes it's the actual words. Sometimes I have the words with my sisters, but we still can't understand each other. Right?
Yeah,
so
right.
all levels of understanding is what we're trying to accomplish in both ESL and mediation. So I actually had this light bulb moment, which was, I'm going to try this with my ESL students and see what happens. So I just started trying active listening exercises, then role plays, and Berkeley is so wonderful. They let you try stuff. And because it was going so well, we got such great feedback. I proposed standalone courses in mediation as a second language, and those fill all the time. And now I have 3 or 4 other teachers. So we really have about 100 international students every summer learning this, all from that light bulb moment.
All from that moment. There's a clip on your website from Aziz Sarah. Am I saying it?
Abu, sorry, yes.
Okay, and so I want to take a look at that and then hear some comments from you about that clip. So let's take a look at that clip now, and then we'll talk about it.
Great.
After my brother was killed, for years I worked against peace. I was very active in mobilization. I was very active in throwing stones. I was very active in writing. And when I was 18, I decided that I needed to learn Hebrew, even though it was mandatory in my high school and I didn't do it. And when I went to learn Hebrew, it was the first time I sit in a classroom. Everybody around me is Jewish, but we're not soldiers, we're not settlers. And that interaction was so different. And we started over really weird things, have nothing to do with conflict. We started our conversations about music. The fact that I love country music, which is really strange for Palestinians, and I found a couple people who did. We talked about coffee and which coffee is better, instant coffee or Arabic coffee. But it was from there that the whole demonization of the other was so hard to follow anymore, because we got to see a human being. And next time there was a suicide bombing in Jerusalem, I didn't think of the enemy and suicide bombing against the enemy. I thought of my friends. And I picked up the phone and I started calling to make sure none of them are hurt. Next time there was a problem in East Jerusalem and somebody was shot, all these people in my Hebrew class started calling me and wanting to make sure that I'm fine. And that interaction, that reality, made me come to a point of understanding that we have to bring down those walls that separate us. And if we know each other a little better as a humans, we might be able to also love each other instead of kill each other. My greatest hardship is getting over my anger and getting over my understanding of what is justice. I, for many years, thought justice and revenge were the same thing. And it took me years to overcome the anger of having my brother being killed in Jerusalem by Israeli soldiers and being able to come to the point of reconciling and getting to know the other side and work for peace. That was one of the hardest challenges. But ironically, it doesn't end in one point. Most people want to believe that change happened in 1 minute, and that's not true. The change that happened with me was a process, and this greatest challenge still continues with me today. Waking up every morning, reading the news, getting angry, and then deciding which path do I want to take. Every day when I read about, and it happens quite a bit, I read about somebody being killed in prison from torture. It brings to me the memories of my brother being killed in prison through torture. And I have to again decide that this is not the path I want to take. It's a daily decision, it's a daily fight. After becoming a person who wants to work for peace, I would go to schools and talk to students. And one time I went to an Israeli school and talked to a student who was very angry. His uncle was killed by a Palestinian suicide bomber, and all he wanted is a revenge. And he told me, all I want is to go to the army and kill as many Palestinians as possible. And I looked at him and I said, I totally understand. I had the same pain. I understand where the anger comes from. I understand that motivation of wanting to revenge, of wanting justice and thinking that revenge is justice. I can totally identify. And You know what? Take a moment and tell me how you feel. Yell at me. It's fine. It's fine to yell. It's fine to be angry. But then you still have the ability to make a difference. If you go and kill somebody else, their relative is gonna come and kill somebody else from your side. And we're gonna go into this cycle of killing. And then your neighbor might end up having to suffer because of your action. Is it really worth it? Is killing somebody else gonna make you feel better? Trust me, it will not. I've gone through this path of revenge. Hurting other people never makes you better. It makes you angrier, it makes you more bitter, and it makes you more empty. Try to think a little differently. Try to reach out. And know what's amazing is it was a long conversation, and a couple hours later, he looked at me and he said, I don't know if I can hold a gun anymore. I don't know if I want to even go to the army anymore. And to watch that happening, to me, if nothing else I've done in my life and saving that one person from becoming a murderer, it's worth everything I've done.
So as we could see in that clip, there is an expansion of understanding. Now that clip you can see in its entirety, which we showed to you, on the website mslmediation.com. And I'll give that website to you again at the end. That is the collective website about this entire program. So Barry, let's continue on talking about the website and the program. What was your thinking in putting that clip on the site? What brought you to do that?
I put it on the site to inspire ESL instructors, to help them remember why they wanted to become ESL instructors in the first place. A lot of ESL instructors are really deep thinkers about the power of language, the power of communication, the power of helping students change in positive ways. And I put it on because he is one of my heroes. He actually, although he was not talking about English, he was a keynote speaker at a recent international conference for teachers of English as a second language. And the reason is he gets to the potential power of an ESL classroom. It might look so modest, ordinary, humdrum, an ESL classroom, but there is so much potential power, as we saw from him. He went from learning a little bit of a new language to deep, active listening with someone who wanted to kill all his relatives. And they weren't even focused on mediation. Just as a natural part of learning the language, he learned active listening skills, the focus on understanding. And I feel that ESL instructors can reframe what they're doing in the classroom to be as powerful as his Hebrew teacher was.
So would you say that the general premise then about all of this is that as we expand our understanding, then we expand the possibility for peace?
Yes, I think that the clip you showed is proof of that.
I'm thinking about a Brene Brown quote that she talks about in her latest book, Braving the Wilderness, and she talks saying it's hard to hate people up close. She has a chapter about that. It made me think about that when the clip was going on.
No, that's exactly right. And that's what happens in a language class. You're up close, getting to know people. What is your favorite holiday? What is your favorite food? Tell me about your family. How can you hate people after you learn about after they share that?
Yeah, that's just an interesting model to think about the world today and like what could be accomplished, right?
Exactly. And a language class is a perfect opportunity to not focus on it, but do it anyway. It's like having a conversation without having the conversation. Oh no, we're not focusing on peace or mediation. We're trying to learn English.
Yeah, that's good. So the students take this class.
Yes.
So what would you say is their response, like from their point of view?
The students love it because they don't feel like they're studying English, yet their English improves astronomically. Why? Because they are spending a summer learning authentic English that they actually can use in and out of the classroom during their summer at Berkeley, trying to negotiate with the tour guide to Yosemite, trying to deal with roommates from Europe, trying to deal with food. Everything is a negotiation day in, day out. It's an intercultural, cross-cultural mediation, and what we learn in class is immediately useful to them. And what they experience out of class, we bring into class and use it as a lesson. Everything is grist for the mill.
Okay.
They say that it's 2 for the price of 1. They get English and mediation in one.
Yeah, it does seem like that.
It's a nice idiom for them to learn.
Yeah. Okay, so as an academician, of course, one of the pressing questions that occurred to me immediately about your program is I would love to know why it works. And I have some thoughts about that. Why do you think it works?
I think it works for the reason I mentioned. It's authentic, it's real. Students feel empowered. When they do a role play, each student has his or her role, and the group is depending on them. We have two mediators, we have two parties. Everyone has to be in their role and play it, so they are empowered to do their best for the sake of their group. So they're not thinking about perfect English, they're thinking about what they need to do in their role play, and of course it has to be in English because they speak different languages. It's a genuine communication need.
Right. So then it's just embedded and now and active and probably imperfect too.
Exactly.
Really in terms of how it comes out. I would imagine there's probably some laughs that happen.
Well, you know, the lapses, that is the teaching moment. So for example, if someone is telling their story and they're not using the proper verb tenses,
Oh,
I'm not
right.
going to be the teacher with the red pen, fix it because it has to be perfect. Fix it because we actually cannot understand what you're telling us.
Yeah.
Did you mean it already happened? It's happening now, it's going to happen? So we actually need the verb tense, not to get an A on a test,
Right.
but to understand what's going on.
So that's like harnessing the full use of language, right?
Exactly.
Instead of saying, let's use the language perfectly, let's use it pragmatically.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, as I became familiar with your program, immediately I thought of Vygotsky and the learning theories that he, in his short life actually, he only lived to 38 years old, but he advanced a lot of our current thinking about learning. And for me, I thought, if I were answering that question of why it works, I think from a Vygotskian perspective, there's some really good theoretical underpinnings that might explain it. So what I want to do now is take a look at a video on Vygotsky, and then maybe we can talk about the program related to that theoretical underpinning. Let's take a look.
All right, the next theory that we're going to take a look at is Vygotsky's theory of development, which is also the sociocultural theory of development. So, building upon the importance of social interaction, Vygotsky studied the role that social interaction plays in the development of cognition. So, he was really focused on the social interaction between children, which are obviously growing. So, he focused on children and their growth development, the interactions they had with those around them in the development of their cognition and their higher order learning. Now, Vygotsky actually, unfortunately, passed away at a very young age. He was only 38, so much of his theory was left unfinished. But from what we do know of what he did discover and what he did theorize, gives us a lot of insight into this theory of development. So, Vygotsky developed this theory, and he said that babies have elementary mental functions, and there are 4 of them. So these elementary mental functions, I'm going to just write shorthand, MF for mental functions. So he said there are 4 of them. One of them is attention. So we have attention. We have sensation as babies, remember. We have perception. And we also have memory. So these are the 4 elementary mental functions that babies have. Now, eventually, through interaction with their environment, the sociocultural environment, these elementary mental functions are developed into more sophisticated and effective mental processes or strategies. And this is what we call our higher mental functions. So, much of our important learning that a child goes through occurs through the social interaction with a skillful tutor. So whether it's their teacher, their parents, or someone older. So this tutor acts as a model, and they model their behaviors or they provide verbal instruction for the child. So the child often tries to understand the actions or instructions provided by the tutor, often the parent or the teacher, and then they internalize it, and they use that to actually guide and regulate their own performance. So let's take a little trip down memory lane. Think about when you were a little kid and when you were given your first puzzle to put together. I remember when I had my first puzzle and I was trying to solve it all alone, I had a really hard time. But I also remember my dad sitting right next to me and describing and demonstrating some basic techniques and tips and strategies to solve it. So he first told me to put, or actually find, all the corner and edge pieces and to separate those from the middle pieces. And he gave me a couple pieces to put together and kept on encouraging me as I went along. So eventually, I became more competent, and my father didn't have to sit next to me, and he was just able to watch me solve the puzzle. I was able to learn, I was actually able to work more independently. So higher mental functions are characterized more by independent learning and thinking, but that can only be cultivated by the elementary mental functions, which involve a tutor or someone older who acts as a guide through which we model our behavior. So according to Vygotsky, this type of social interaction involves cooperative and collaborative dialogue, and that's what promotes this cognitive ability or development. So in this example I was telling you about, my dad was an MKO, which is a more knowledgeable other. So this is the first key term that I want you to know. MKO stands for more knowledgeable other. So this is one term that Vygotsky defined. So the more knowledgeable other is basically someone who has a better understanding or a higher ability level than the learner, which in this example was me. I was the learner. So this MKO has a higher level of understanding and ability with respect to whatever the task is at hand. So in this case, my dad was an MKO because he had a better understanding of how to put the puzzle together than I did. So an MKO is someone else, but then we have to add in that sociocultural factor. So the interaction of myself, which is right here, with the MKO, the other person, is what leads to learning, which we'll put over here. And it's what also leads to these higher mental functions and independence. Now, the second key term that I want you to know is called the zone of proximal development. So ZPD for short, but I'll just write it out here. So it's called the zone of proximal development. And basically, I'm going to illustrate in a second for you what this looks like. But this zone of proximal development is the part where the most sensitive instruction or guidance should be given. So in my puzzle example, I was in that zone of proximal development because I was most sensitive to the information my father was giving me. I was between the ability of being able to do something and not being able to do something. And then that zone of guidance that I received is what allowed me to transition from the set of skills I already have to a more expanded set of skills by learning and going beyond what I had already known. So this is what develops these higher mental functions. So let's pretend that this is our, right here, I'm going to draw a box. And this box right here represents everything that's beyond our reach and what we can't do. So I'm going to put a big can't do over here. And then this little circle inside over here represents everything we can do currently. In our current state, it's what we can do. And according to Vygotsky, this zone of proximal development is the link between the two. Right in here, your ZPD. And that is the zone or the area that's most sensitive to instruction or guidance that allows the learner or child to develop the skills they already have and to use it on their own and go beyond into the areas they can't do to expand that learning. So, for example, I couldn't solve the jigsaw puzzle by myself when I was little. It would have taken me such a long time to do, or at all. But I was able to solve it following the interaction with my father. So the ZPD involves an interaction with the MKO. And eventually I developed that competence of that skill that I can also use in the future. So this arrow right here, I'm just going to show you, is what represents all of our learning and our development. Now, another important part of Vygotsky's theory was the importance of language. So I'll put that right over here. Number 3 is language. So according to Vygotsky, he said that language is the main means by which adults transmit info to children, and it's also a very powerful tool of intellectual adaptation. So he looked at private speech. Now, private speech is also called internal speech. It's when people talk out loud to themselves, which happens most likely with what type of population? Do adults speak out loud to themselves a lot, or do children? Well, it's actually children. Most children engage in private speech. And Vygotsky, sees this as a way for children to plan activities and strategies, and this aids in their development, this act of speaking to themselves, talking out loud. So he said that language is therefore an accelerator to thinking and understanding. So children who engage in large amounts of private speech are actually much more socially competent than children who do not use it that much. So he believed that language develops from social interactions for communication purposes. And later language ability becomes internalized as thought. So as we grow older, it becomes more internalized, which is called our inner speech. So basically, thought is a result of language. That ability to think for ourselves and develop that independence of executing skills comes from this importance of language, according to Vygotsky. So there you have it. These are the 3 main parts of his theory.
So I wanted to show you that overview of Vygotskyan theory so that you understood the connections that I would make between the MSL program and the Vygotskyan theoretical framework. Let's think about 3 main principles that you and I just heard. The first one is that language accelerates thinking and understanding. The next one is that learning precedes development. So we must learn to engage in tasks just beyond our present abilities. And that's this notion of the zone of proximal development. And then third, we use MKOs, which are more knowledgeable others, to provide scaffolding to support the learning. Now, as you can see in those explanations, that the crossover seems very fluid in terms of actively teaching, using language as the vehicle, using teachers who become more like peers and therefore assume the roles of most knowledgeable others. And so that's what I was thinking, and I want to come back to you, Barry, and talk about this. Those were kind of some of my connections to your program. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I completely agree, and it's so exciting to think about it in these ways, which I haven't been doing. So I really appreciate this crash course in Vygotsky.
Yeah, well, I guess the comments that I would make as I'm kind of thinking about it, my background, which I think you know a little bit about, was in youth mediation programs, and one of the main features that used to happen in those programs is that vice principals didn't want to deal with basically female-female conflict, is what I learned early on when I was exposed to those programs. And they would say the reason they didn't want to deal with it is it took too long, which it does. And so the vice principals would say, I don't have an hour or 2 to hear why you weren't invited to the sleepover and why you're so mad about it, or whatever it is. Frequently, the main dispute was being left out, right? We used to call it exclusivity. It was like our, 4 times more higher incidence of that conflict versus every other kind of conflict on the campus. You can see in a junior high environment, middle school environment, of course, that does make sense because the sense of belonging is so high. So I began working in those programs, and one of the things that the vice principal said to me early on was, in my first program, was that the collaboration with peers was superior anyway. And so what we would do is train 6th grade mediators to handle those cases without the presence of the adult in the room, without the even someone with a cup to the door listening. Like, it was they were absolutely mediating it 100% of the time with the peer, and through language And through that peer being a more knowledgeable other, they were able to achieve these higher levels. And so that's kind of how I come to this conversation. But as I'm thinking about it, it makes sense in terms of mediation, but also in terms of English as a second language. So as I heard that theory talked about, I kept thinking, gosh, the crossover is incredible because both are utilizing this zone of proximal development, this notion that I have to push myself to do things that are just outside my reach. And that this most knowledgeable other provides this thing called scaffolding, or in other words, the support to make that happen. And so what I find, and something you alluded to earlier in the show, is that as a trainer in mediation, it's not me saying, everyone do this in mediation. It's me next to you doing mediation, right? It's me coaching you and saying, okay, let's think about this. And there's something interesting about it becoming more peer-like, I think, in that framework, or coach-like, as opposed to, you got the grammar word wrong, or you don't know the vocabulary or whatever. But it seems like the crossovers in both areas, interestingly. Like the mediation, because there's those skills that are just out of reach, and then there's the English as a second language out of reach.
That's absolutely right. And what else is out of reach oftentimes is the culture. So I might think I know best in terms of what would work in my culture. But when you have, let's say, a Chinese student mediating with a Saudi Arabian student, they may have a completely different idea about what works best. And I better be a peer at best and not...
Yeah, right.
Right.
I would say probably do have different ideas.
Right. So the collaboration among the students is what is so important. Let them work it out. If it's not my philosophy of mediation, I don't care. The goals are more important than sticking to a particular process or philosophy.
Right. Right. So I, of course, think about all of this academically because that's my background, and you're a practitioner.
Yes.
For sure. Even though you have an academic background, which I appreciate. So as I'm thinking about this, my next question after theory is, of course, about research. What kind of research has been done on MSL, or what is yet to be done? And that is pretty typical of practitioner work to be less measured, less researched, because basically my experience is practitioners get things done. So if it's working, it's working. So my question is, what research is out there, or what needs to be out there?
There is no specific research on MSL yet. And I say yet because I have a lot of ideas for research projects I would like to do. And if anyone out there is listening who would like to do a research project.
There might be some people listening.
Well, let's just start with the language. I would love to have a corpora, which is what we call the corpora of mediation. Somebody to study that. That's a topic for another time.
Okay.
But also I would like someone to study the effect of studying English through emotions. Does that really help us get the language acquisition when we're in an emotional state of a role play, let's say? My theory is yes. There have been studies on emotions and language and the connection between them, but not particularly in mediation role plays. But at the core, I would like to know, do my students excel in English outside of the classroom in ways that are more effective than if they had just taken a straight communications English class?
Right, like
I wish I could have,
yeah.
I wish I could have a control group of some kind.
Easy, randomized control group design.
I've come to the right place.
Yes.
But I would like to see how my students focus on active listening and mediation might improve their language overall years later. This would be my hope. I think it's happening, but I don't have any research yet.
So going back to that emotion idea,
Yes.
do you believe that based on the fact that when anytime we speak there is emotional meaning transmitted? Is that where that comes from? Which is sort of like not in the book?
Exactly, because actual communication is laden with layers of emotion and meanings, tone, formality, and we're conveying so much. I don't need to tell you. We're conveying so much.
I'm a believer.
So I'm just wondering what effect that has on language acquisition and fluency,
Right.
and general comfort with the language.
Yeah, so it's like think about versus doing, or maybe true understanding, full understanding.
Exactly.
Which is kind of interesting to think about. Last question for you. Where do you see it going? So you're doing it at Berkeley. Like, what's next?
Well, I'll tell you my hope.
Okay.
My hope is to train thousands of ESL instructors all over the world in mediation. Enough mediation that they could adapt MSL to their own ESL courses nationwide and worldwide rather, and to think about their work as ESL teachers in a completely new way, as leaders of laboratories for peace. Every ESL classroom throughout the world as a laboratory for peace. And now we have Skype. We could do role plays across the oceans. Right?
Yeah, right, absolutely.
We could do active listening across the continents. So I'd like to see how we could use technology to further the goal of having ESL classrooms have the impact they had on Aziz.
Very, very interesting. So those are some big goals.
They're big goals.
International. So,
Yes, they are.
Yeah, so that also means that inherent to that goal is that you believe that's possible, meaning you believe that training is what, that people can be trained and be able to go do it.
I absolutely believe that. And one reason I do is what ESL teachers are already doing is so close to what mediators do. They can't see it. Mediators don't see it, but I see it because I've been on both sides.
Right.
And I know once I took mediation courses and started watching my colleagues teach ESL, I thought this is really close. We don't need to train them a lot.
Right.
We do need to train them how to set up a role play, some of the technical aspects of teaching and mediation, and give some ideas about how to incorporate the language just at the right time. And there are so many different approaches. So for example, we might have law and business students, we might have general ESL students, we might have kindergartens, we might have adults. So just to help guide them. But I have materials ready to go. I have a book in review. So I'm hoping to use this as a way to go around the world teaching teachers how to teach this and then have them start becoming teacher trainers too.
Wow. Well, I hope that happens.
Thank you.
I'm a believer.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being on the show today to help us learn about MSL. We really appreciate you being
My
here.
pleasure. I enjoyed it.
So if you would like more information on this program, you can go to mslmediation.com and click on that link, and you will learn much more about this program and the exciting strides that they're making. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on the show, and we hope that you found it valuable. Have a great day.